The world outside is alive with sound, cars moving, lights glowing in distant windows. But inside your own space, there's a different kind of energy. It's quiet. No music, no conversation, just the steady rhythm of your own breath. Many might call this loneliness, but for some, it feels like peace. It feels like coming home. Have you ever felt misunderstood because you enjoy being alone? For a long time, I thought there was something wrong with me. I wondered if my comfort in silence meant I was disconnected, different, or even broken. But the more time I spent in my own company, the more I realized solitude isn't emptiness. It's awareness. There's a quiet group of people, perhaps you're one of them, who find strength in stillness. They don't fear silence. They understand it. Psychology shows they aren't lonely at all. In fact, they are often among the most emotionally intelligent and self-aware people you'll ever meet. In a world that worships noise and constant connection, solitude can seem suspicious, even sad. But science tells a different story. When we choose to be alone, something powerful happens in the brain. We shift from external attention to deep self-reflection. This is the mental space where we process emotions, organize memories, and rediscover who we are beneath all the noise. Neuroscientists call this the activation of the default mode network, the system that lights up when we rest, imagine, and reflect. It's not a withdrawal from the world, it's a process of integration. A researcher who studied states of flow once noted that only when a person is comfortable being alone can they truly engage in the highest forms of creativity and consciousness. Solitude, then, isn't isolation. It's depth. It's the space where thoughts take shape, where healing begins, and where we learn to breathe again. So the next time someone calls you quiet or distant, you can smile, knowing something they might not. Silence isn't a void, it's a language, and those who speak it fluently aren't hiding from life. They're listening to it more deeply than anyone else. When we talk about people who genuinely enjoy being alone, we often mistake their quiet for loneliness, as if choosing silence means rejecting connection. But solitude, in its truest sense, is not an absence. It's a presence, an awareness. To like being alone doesn't mean turning away from the world. It means feeling at home within yourself. Psychologists call this autonomous solitude, time spent alone by choice, not out of isolation. A study published in the Journal of Positive Psychology found that people who intentionally seek solitude report higher emotional stability, creativity, and self-reliance. They aren't avoiding others. They're recharging through reflection. Another expert described this state as constructive aloneness, when being by yourself becomes a source of growth rather than emptiness. The difference between solitude and loneliness lies in intention. People who enjoy solitude often possess a strong sense of self-regulation, the ability to manage their emotions without needing constant external validation. Neuroscientists at the University of Rochester discovered that solitude activates the parasympathetic nervous system, lowering stress and restoring calm. The body, in stillness, learns to feel safe again. In this way, solitude becomes an act of integration. It's not a retreat from life, but a return to oneself. A noted writer once observed that without solitude, we cannot construct our sense of self. For people who love being alone, stillness becomes a mirror where thoughts, emotions, and memories finally find order. It's not a wall between them and the world. It's the space where they prepare to meet it more honestly. So the psychology of people who like to be alone isn't about detachment. It's about balance, emotional independence, and inner clarity. They don't escape life. They pause to understand it. And in that quiet pause, they find something many overlook, a peace that doesn't need an audience. There was a time when I questioned why silence felt safer than conversation, why I could spend hours alone and still feel full, not lonely, just calm. For a while, I thought something in me was broken, but I've come to understand that my love for solitude didn't appear out of nowhere. It has deep psychological roots. Many of us who enjoy being alone didn't choose it because we dislike people. We chose it because our minds learned early that peace lives in quiet spaces. Some grew up in environments where emotions were unpredictable, where love felt conditional, or where conflict filled the air. In places like that, silence becomes a sanctuary. Psychologists call this self-regulation, the body's way of finding calm after overstimulation. And science agrees. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology found that solitude helps regulate the amygdala, the part of the brain that triggers stress and anxiety. Time alone allows that system to reset, reducing emotional reactivity and improving mental clarity. That explains why thinking often becomes clearer when we're by ourselves, why small problems stop feeling like overwhelming storms once the world grows quiet. But solitude isn't only about safety. It's also about restoration. When time is spent alone, thoughts begin to settle, like dust finding its place after being stirred. In that stillness, we can hear ourselves again. Psychologists call this interoceptive awareness, the ability to sense one's inner state. It's what allows us to recognize when we're tired, when we're peaceful, or when we simply need space. Over time, this awareness becomes a form of emotional maturity, knowing what we feel before it controls us. A researcher who spent years studying solitude once wrote that without solitude, we cannot construct our sense of self. At first, that was hard to grasp, but now it makes sense. When we're constantly surrounded by noise, opinions, expectations, and conversations, it's easy to lose track of what truly belongs to us. Solitude becomes a kind of mirror, reflecting back who we are without interference. That's why, for many, being alone isn't a reaction. It's a conscious choice. We choose solitude the way others might choose conversation, not because we're avoiding connection, but because we value it. Solitude gives us the space to return to the world more grounded, more honest, more whole. It's not withdrawal, it's renewal. A study from the University at Buffalo found that people who are comfortable with solitude tend to show higher levels of emotional stability, autonomy, and creativity. They don't rely on constant interaction to feel complete. Instead, they build an inner strength that sustains them. That insight reveals something important. Solitude isn't an escape from life. It's an act of self-trust. And maybe that's what's so often misunderstood. Choosing to be alone doesn't mean we've closed the door on others. It means we've learned that peace doesn't always come from presence. Sometimes it comes from pause. Solitude isn't the absence of love or connection. It's the space where both begin quietly from within. The more time we spend alone, the clearer it becomes that solitude doesn't separate us. It connects us more deeply to ourselves. People who enjoy being alone aren't avoiding life. They're learning to understand it from the inside out. In psychology, this is called high self-regulation, the ability to find calm and clarity without depending on external validation. Research from the University of Wisconsin-Madison found that people who regularly embrace solitude show stronger activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for emotional regulation and reflection. In other words, solitude trains the mind to stay steady even when life feels uncertain. When we're alone, our brain shifts into a different mode, one focused on reflection and integration. That's why the quiet doesn't feel empty, it feels alive. Our minds aren't shutting down, they're reorganizing, processing, and creating meaning. Solitude also deepens self-awareness. Without constant distraction, we begin to notice our emotional rhythms, what drains us, what restores us, what we truly value. Psychologists refer to this as meta-awareness, the ability to observe thoughts without being consumed by them. Over time, that awareness builds authenticity. We stop performing and start understanding. We make choices that align with who we are, not who we think we should be. Research from the University at Buffalo found that people comfortable with solitude tend to make more autonomous decisions and set healthier boundaries. They aren't detached, they're emotionally self-sufficient. This independence comes from what psychologists call an internal locus of control, the belief that peace comes from within, not from the approval of others. Interestingly, solitude can make us more empathetic, not less. A study published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin revealed that people who regularly practice solitude show higher empathic accuracy. They understand others' emotions more clearly because they've learned to understand their own. When we sit quietly with our feelings, we learn to recognize that same humanity in others. So perhaps people who like to be alone aren't running from connection at all. They're preparing for it, grounding themselves so they can meet the world with gentleness instead of exhaustion. In the end, solitude doesn't silence us. It refines us. It teaches us that peace doesn't always come from presence. Sometimes it comes from pause. Those who love solitude aren't detached from life. They're deeply attuned to it. Because in stillness, we don't escape the world. We understand it. When we're alone, something gentle happens. Neuroscientists call this the default mode network. This system activates when we rest or reflect. Instead of going idle, the brain turns inward, connecting emotions, memories, and ideas that help us make sense of ourselves. A Yale University study found that solitude strengthens this network, enhancing emotional clarity and creativity. That's why moments of silence often bring sudden insights. The brain isn't shutting down, it's reorganizing. Our bodies respond just as profoundly. Research from the University of Rochester shows that solitude activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's built-in recovery mode. Heart rate slows, cortisol levels drop, and the body signals that you're safe now. It's a biological reset, similar to the calm we feel during meditation or deep rest. Solitude, in that sense, is regulation. A researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison discovered that solitude strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that governs emotional control and decision-making. That may be why quiet time helps us respond thoughtfully instead of simply reacting. Over time, this strengthens what psychologists call intrinsic regulation, the ability to restore balance from within rather than chasing it through distraction or approval. Psychologists have found that people who regularly spend reflective time alone tend to show lower stress levels, greater creativity, and higher resilience. A study published in Frontiers in Psychology revealed that solitude improves cognitive flexibility, our ability to shift perspective and think more clearly. It's as if quiet moments give the mind space to reset its emotional compass. Even creativity thrives here. A scholar who studied flow states wrote that true creativity emerges when the mind is both calm and engaged, a state that solitude naturally supports. In silence, alpha brain waves rise, imagination awakens, and ideas flow effortlessly. So maybe people like us, those who find comfort in quiet, aren't withdrawing from the world at all. We're recalibrating, letting the brain and body return to their natural rhythm. Solitude isn't avoidance, it's alignment. It's how the mind organizes, the heart heals, and the self comes home. Sometimes solitude begins as a form of escape, a way to breathe when the world feels too heavy, too loud, too demanding. But for those who truly find peace in being alone, something deeper happens with time. The silence that once felt like withdrawal begins to feel like restoration. It's not about running from the world. It's about returning to yourself. Psychology calls this process emotional regulation through self-reflection, the ability to face emotions safely rather than avoiding them. At first, being alone can feel uncomfortable. The quiet amplifies what we usually drown out: the doubts, the regrets, the things left unsaid. Yet it's in that discomfort that something honest begins to unfold. According to a Harvard study, moments of intentional silence activate the insula, a part of the brain tied to emotional awareness and empathy. In simple terms, solitude doesn't numb us. It sharpens our understanding of how we feel. It helps us hear our emotions not as noise, but as signals guiding us toward balance. People who like to be alone often develop this awareness naturally. They learn that silence can be a mirror, reflecting back the parts of themselves that need attention, compassion, or forgiveness. In solitude, emotions stop being chaotic. They start to communicate. Anxiety becomes a call for rest. Sadness reminds us what we value. Even anger reveals where boundaries have been crossed. This emotional clarity, psychologists explain, is a sign of high self-regulation, the ability to stay calm and centered without depending on external reassurance. The more we lean into solitude, the more it transforms from avoidance into connection, not with others, but with ourselves. That acceptance is exactly what solitude teaches. It gives us permission to stop performing and simply be. Neuroscience supports this too. When we rest and reflect, the brain's default mode network activates, helping us process experiences, integrate emotions, and form a stronger sense of identity. In this way, solitude becomes an active form of healing, not a pause from life, but a quiet recalibration. It allows us to process the emotional noise that constant social interaction often buries. For people who enjoy being alone, stillness isn't a lack of connection. It's a different kind of connection, one that starts inward before it reaches outward. And over time, the relationship with solitude matures. What once felt like loneliness becomes grounding. The quiet isn't empty. It's full of thought, emotion, and gentle understanding. As we stop running from ourselves, we begin to listen more deeply. Healing, it turns out, doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, the kind that says, "You are safe now." And that's the quiet truth behind people who like to be alone. They aren't detached from the world. They've simply learned that peace begins within. That solitude isn't separation, but the space where the self finally feels seen. Sometimes we believe solitude can fix everything, that if we stay quiet long enough, the noise inside will fade. But even healing has a shadow. Too much silence can turn into isolation. What once felt like peace can harden into distance. Psychologists call this pseudo-solitude, when being alone shifts from restoration to avoidance. We tell ourselves we're protecting our peace, but often we're protecting our pain. A study from the University of California, Berkeley, found that long-term isolation activates the same brain region as physical pain. It explains why the longer we withdraw, the heavier life can feel. Mornings become dull, small joys fade. Solitude can heal, but only when it stays connected to life. True solitude is active. It restores balance and awareness. Isolation numbs. A psychologist described it as a self-reinforcing loop. The more we pull away, the harder it becomes to return. Many of us have felt that, how silence, once comforting, can slowly become a cage. That's why mindful solitude matters. It's the practice of checking in. Am I recharging or am I hiding? Solitude isn't meant to protect us from truth, but to prepare us for it. Healing, after all, needs both quiet and connection. Studies show that the same oxytocin system that soothes us in love also activates through self-compassion. Even alone, we can feel connected if we meet ourselves with kindness. Because solitude teaches us who we are, but connection reminds us why it matters. The goal isn't to build walls. It's to find doors, ways back to the world that feel calm, honest, and real. The more we sit with solitude, the more we begin to see it isn't a retreat from life, but a return to it. Healing doesn't always come from doing more. Sometimes it comes from being still long enough to face what we've been running from. In those quiet spaces, we stop chasing peace outside and start discovering it within. Psychologists call this existential integration, when our inner world finally aligns with the way we live. A study in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology found that reflective solitude strengthens both purpose and emotional balance. Many of us have felt this. Life doesn't suddenly become easier, but it starts to make more sense. We stop fighting ourselves. Silence also teaches self-compassion. In the stillness, we notice how harsh our inner voice can be, and we learn to soften it. Research shows that people who practice self-compassion recover faster from stress and build deeper resilience. When we stop demanding perfection, we begin to heal in quieter, more sustainable ways. Over time, solitude becomes less of a refuge and more of a teacher. It doesn't erase pain. It transforms it into understanding. Each quiet morning becomes proof that meaning isn't something to be found, but something we create by showing up fully. Perhaps that why is what solitude helps us rediscover, the part of ourselves that remains steady even when life isn't. So when the world feels heavy, maybe the answer isn't escape, but remembrance. Solitude reminds us that healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about coming home to the self that's been waiting patiently in the quiet all along. Maybe you've been called distant, quiet, or hard to read. For a long time, I thought something was wrong with me, that maybe I wasn't meant for a world that never stops talking. But solitude showed me otherwise. It taught me that being alone isn't about escaping life. It's about returning to it more grounded, more aware. I've found that to be true. Time alone doesn't make me love people less. It helps me love them more honestly, because when I find peace within myself, I stop asking others to fill my emptiness. I can finally meet them with presence, not need. Science explains this too. Research from the University of Rochester found that solitude increases alpha brain wave patterns, which are linked to calm, focus, and creativity. That's why after moments of quiet, my thoughts feel clearer and my heart steadier. Solitude, I've learned, is not absence. It's restoration. Over time, I stopped seeing silence as loneliness and started seeing it as strength. That's exactly what I found. Solitude doesn't make me distant, it makes me real. So, if you've ever felt misunderstood for needing time alone, remember this. Solitude isn't where you lose yourself. It's where you finally find yourself again. That's the quiet gift of solitude. It brings you home. In the end, solitude isn't about walking away from the world. It's about returning to it with a steadier heart. In the quiet, we rediscover what truly matters: peace, clarity, and the courage to just be. So maybe the next time life gets too loud, give yourself permission to pause. Sit with the silence. It's about returning to it with a steadier heart. In the quiet, we rediscover what truly matters: peace, clarity, and the courage to just be. So maybe the next time life gets too loud, give yourself permission to pause. Sit with the silence. Listen to what it's trying to tell you, because sometimes that's where healing begins. If this message speaks to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps create more reflections, more stories, and more reminders that even in silence, there is a voice worth hearing.